My name is Natalie, and on behalf of the library, I welcome you all to this program on the imagery of Hanukkah. And now to introduce our presenter, we have Julie Harris, who's a Glencoe resident and art historian who specializes in the art of medieval Iberia. She has taught art history at Northwestern University and Skidmore College, among others. She was recently awarded a Center for Spain and America Fellowship at the Clark Institute in Williamstown, Massachusetts, for her project on the decorative carpet pages of Iberian Hebrew Bibles. She is also part of an international team of scholars researching medieval treasures in Spain. And as I mentioned, this is her fourth presentation on holiday imagery here at the library. It is so nice to have you once again, and I'll let you take it from here.
Thank you. Thank you, Natalie. So I always start by saying the same thing, that I come as an art historian, a medievalist. And this is slightly different because I'm talking about things like food, which we are using now. But I like people to bear in mind a few ideas or cautions. One, when we do research, when we talk about art history, material objects, especially Jewish ritual objects, we have three categories. I say there's what we know, what we have in terms of historical sources, so historical material. There's what we have in terms of surviving objects, and there's the stories we tell about them. And sometimes there's a conflict, there's a mismatch between the stories we're telling about what we have and what we actually have. And that's how I sort of got into this business of looking at ritual objects, because I was working with cultural heritage tours and studies in medieval Spain, and I came to realize that very little, if any, thing that's being exhibited as medieval Jewish ceremonial objects in Spanish museums is actually a medieval object or a ceremonial object. So most of the material is misunderstood or misrepresented, and people don't know that. So I felt it was kind of incumbent on me to share the hard truths, and it's a method that anyone can understand. We need to know what information we have, we need to know what objects we have, and we need to know what the stories that have accreted to all of this. So is it true, are they false, and who's telling the stories, and who benefits from the narrative that's being created. So that's just something to bear in mind, and that's kind of underlying all the Thanksgiving imagery, American Thanksgiving imagery, Christmas imagery, all of it. So much has changed. And what you learn, if you're careful and you think about it, is that people make a lot of the same mistakes over and over again. And one mistake is to think that because we do something a certain way now, it was always done that way. So that if I have this object or I do this ritual on a holiday, well, certainly it was then done that way in the very beginning. Or if Jews from Ashkenaz, meaning Northern Europe, France, Germany, Lithuania, did something in a certain way, then Jews in Spain probably did it. So they're monolithic. So those are both incorrect assumptions, and it's something we need to keep in mind. So culture is always changing, objects are always changing, and the stories we tell sometimes don't adapt as well to that idea. So let's talk about Hanukkah. So I'm going to do a little bit about the history of the holiday, a little bit about the objects, activities, and foods commonly associated with Hanukkah. Of course, I think this is the first one I've talked about food. I don't think I talked about food with any of the other holidays. So this is fun. A little bit about Hanukkah in America, not as much as I initially had planned, and a few controversies. Maybe incorporating some of my research, which I was working on in London last week. Okay, some facts about Hanukkah. The word Hanukkah means dedication, or sometimes we say rededication. And what the dedication refers to is the cleansing and rededication of the temple in Jerusalem after its desecration by the Seleucids in 164 BC. Okay, let's slow down for a minute. So the temple was the actual center for Jewish practice and ritual. It's not like today where we have synagogues. There were still some little synagogues, but the temple was the essence, was the way, the rituals in the temple were the way Jews talked to God. So the temple's desecrated, by the Seleucids, who are one of numerous Hellenistic dynasties. I remember as a kid learning about them, and people say, well, they were the Greek Syrians. And I was like, well, what is a Greek Syrian? What is a Syrian? What does that mean? Well, it simply means that they were a Hellenistic dynasty, the Seleucid dynasty, that was present in Syria and had some connection with the Holy Land. So we're talking 164 before the Common Era. They desecrated the temple, and the scriptural source for Hanukkah is the book of Maccabees, books 1 and 2. These books are not part of the Hebrew Bible. Shocking. I mean, when I started studying Hebrew Bibles, I realized how ignorant I was of what actually was in the Bible and what isn't in the Bible. So they're not part of the canonized Hebrew Bible. They are part of the Christian Old Testament because they were part of the Septuagint. And we don't have to get into too many details. But if you look in a Tanakh, a Hebrew Bible, you will not find the book of Maccabees. That doesn't mean that the Jews didn't know about the book of Maccabees, but it means it's not canonized. The last book in the Hebrew Bible to be canonized is the book of Esther. So this is later. So these books are not part of the Hebrew Bible. And just for those who like maps, that's the Seleucid Empire. And you can see where the Maccabees, who are the heroes of our story from the Hasmonean dynasty, come into conflict with this Seleucid Empire. And these are all the different empires. And eventually, of course, you know what's going to happen. The Roman Empire is going to take over everything. And then the temple is going to be destroyed in 70 Common Era, CE, or AD, as Christians like to say. So just so you know where we are. Here comes that cough. Okay. Some historical sources for the observance of Hanukkah. Have you ever heard of Josephus? Have you ever read Josephus? Yes, good. Oh, great. Well, he was a historian and a general. He was a Jew who kind of went over to the other side. So at first he was supportive of the Jews in the revolts against Rome, and then he capitulates and he becomes kind of an apologist. But thank goodness he wrote, because he writes us about the antiquities of the Jews, Jewish antiquities, which is part of the Loeb Classical Library, so you can get it out English, as we used to say, and read it. And also the Wars of the Jews. So it's very interesting to read for material culture. He has a definite viewpoint. He does not mention, Josephus, the lighting of the Hanukkah menorah or the dedication of the temple, rededication of the temple, but he explains the name this way: the Festival of Lights. The freedom to worship had been concealed in darkness and is now brought to light. So he brings this idea of the Festival of Lights. The emphasis of light comes from Josephus. Again, you can see he defects to the Roman side, and he gives his account of the siege of Masada, and he had prophetic beliefs regarding Vespasian, who's the general who ends up conquering Jerusalem. So Josephus is one source. Another source, surprisingly, is the New Testament, the book of John, chapter 10, verse 22. Says, at the time the festival of dedication, so he uses the term dedication, took place in Jerusalem. Obviously, that means the temple. It was winter, and Jesus was walking in the temple in the portico of Solomon. And so he's telling us where Jesus is. He's telling us the time. It's really just sort of a placeholder to giving us some narrative structure, but he uses the term dedication. He doesn't say Festival of Lights. He actually comes out and says the dedication. And how we can explain the difference between these two accounts is that probably it's not that Josephus didn't know what was happening. It was that he was careful not to offend the Romans. So there was this idea of not associating too much with rededicating the temple when here we have the Romans again despoiling with Vespasian the temple. So it's just two different sort of politics. But in any case, we do have these sources after the fact, much after. Remember, 164 before the Common Era, and these probably the New Testament. John was probably written in 70. Josephus again around the same time. So we do have ancient accounts of Hanukkah. So let's do a little terminology. When people talk about Hanukkah, we always say the menorah, the menorah. And this is kind of surprisingly a term that's maybe incorrect, controversial. The term should really be used for the special temple lamp with 7 lights. But we always say menorah, light the menorah. We even sing the song about lighting the menorah. But the menorah really was that special lamp in the temple, the holy temple. The Hanukkah is a term that people are using. I think it probably developed in Israel when the Hebrew was reborn, the lamp used for Hanukkah. So that is not 7 lights, but is 8 lights with the shamash, which is the helper candle. All right, so if you see a 9-branched or an 8-branched with a little extra one somewhere, that's a Hanukkah, a Hanukkah, or you can call it the Hanukkah menorah. I like to call them Hanukkah lamps. That way I'm not offending anybody. And truthfully, they are lamps. So I'm not upset when someone says menorah, but if you want to be absolutely correct, when you say the term menorah, you really are talking about the temple menorah. And the temple menorah was so special that it was not supposed to be replicated. So, and when the temple was destroyed, the memory of all of these tabernacle and temple implements actually is retained and is used for the iconography of the frontispieces of Iberian Hebrew Bibles. And we have about, I don't even remember how many we have. We have 25 or so. I don't know if we have 25 with the menorah and the temple implements, but by putting these there, the Hebrew Bible takes on the term mikdashia, which means a lesser sanctuary. So it's taking on, means that studying the Bible, studying the Torah, which is the Tanakh, takes on the importance of the rituals that existed in the temple, but the temple's destroyed. So it becomes a substitute until the temple can be rebuilt. So that's the menorah there, and you can see that it has, we're used to looking at it, a big lampstand with, again, 7 branches, 7 lights. And what would be burned in there, not candles, but oil. And the preferred oil was olive oil because it had a clean burn, and probably because they had a lot of olives in the Middle East. Again, a sort of a poignant picture. This is the famous picture in 1931 taken by the Rabbi Rosner's wife in Kiel, Germany. And he put the menorah, or the Hanukkah menorah, the Hanukkah lamp in the window, as you should, as an act of defiance. And actually that actual Hanukkah lamp was taken out. The people survived. The rabbi and his wife survived. And they went to Israel, and the lamp was returned to Germany and was lit in Berlin. I've forgotten how many years ago, but it was in the newspaper. And so this is a very famous photo. You are supposed to, we'll talk about this in a minute, but you're supposed to display the candles, the lit Hanukkah lamp. And here you can imagine it was quite a dangerous prospect to do so. Okay, so some of our sources, every Jewish ritual has endless texts of rabbis discussing with one another what's right and wrong about how you should do it. Talmudic texts, rabbinic texts, later Rishonim, the rabbis through history, the Mishneh Torah, Scroll of Esther, and Hanukkah 4:12. The precept of lighting the Hanukkah lamp is exceedingly precious, and one should carefully observe it in order to acclaim the miracle. So the purpose is to acclaim the miracle, ever praising and thanking God for the miracles he has performed. And this is Maimonides. Maimonides, Mishneh Torah. Maimonides, the great scholar from Spain who ends up going to Egypt in the early Middle Ages, really 11th, 12th century. So the miracle that's being proclaimed is the rededication of the temple. Again, this continues. These days are called Hanukkah, when it is forbidden to lament or to fast. You are not allowed to fast on Hanukkah. You're not supposed to be sad. You're supposed to be joyful. And just as it is on the days of Purim, you're supposed to be joyful. You're actually supposed to be drunk on Purim, but have a good time, party on Purim. Lighting the lamps during the 8 days of Hanukkah is a religious duty imposed by the sages, like the reading of the Megillah or on Purim. So these are a medieval text, Maimonides, what you're supposed to do, that you are supposed to be, you're supposed to enjoy yourself, you're not supposed to lament, you're not supposed to fast, no diets, and you're supposed to light the lamp, and you're doing it in order to acclaim the miracle, Now, notice there's no talk about the Maccabees here, right? So there's this tension throughout history between how this happened. Did God save the Jews in rededicating the temple? Did he defeat the Seleucids? Or did the Maccabees actually do it? And it's sort of the same thing that we get on Passover. Notice nobody talks in Passover Haggadah, which I talked about. Nobody talks about Moses. Nobody talks about that. We talk about God by a mighty arm. So for most of the history, we don't see that much talk about these Maccabees, these brave Maccabees. We don't see much talk about warfare. We talk about a miracle. And we all know there's another miracle, which we'll talk about in a minute, about the light of the oil, that apparently there was enough oil only for one day, but it lasted for 8 days. Okay, so the purpose of the Hanukkah lamps, and this is to me interesting because this is something I struggled with and realized that I was thinking like a modern person and I needed to think like a medieval person or an ancient person. The purpose of the Hanukkah lights or lamps is commemorative. It just said so, right? This is what Maimonides said it, everyone knows it. It acknowledges the rededication of the temple. This purpose provides an important contrast to the Sabbath lamps or Sabbath lights. And this is me here. This is not acknowledged enough by contemporary Jews, speaking of myself. So when contemporary Jews today light the Sabbath candles, most of us do it as a way of connecting to our Jewish heritage. We're not doing it because we need light in our house. But the actual legal halachic, that's Jewish law, designation for why one lights the Sabbath candles is because you're not allowed to light on the Sabbath. So you light the candles so you have light in your house and peace in the home. And that's the reason you use it. You light the candles for light. That's what the Sabbath light is for. But in the modern era, we don't think of that. People have timers if they're religious, or they turn their lights on, they have electricity. So for us, it's now more of a symbolic gesture to light the Sabbath lamps. But that's not the way it was in the Middle Ages. That's not how it was designated. The purpose of the Hanukkah lamps is commemorative, is symbolic, is to be put in your window to show people about the miracle. The Sabbath lamps are for light. So that is why you're not allowed to light one candle from another candle in the Hanukkah lamp. There's a helper candle called the shamash, because that one provides the light and the others are commemorative. Okay, they do the commemoration. This one is the helper or the worker, the servitor, if you're talking about the oil lamps. So here's the other thing we need to think about, is that the specific design of Jewish ritual objects is not usually mandated. What is mandated is that object's ability to fulfill the function of the ritual as it's prescribed by Jewish law. And one thing the rabbis say is put the lights in a straight line. Don't put them in a circle, and one rabbi says, because it'll look like a bonfire. And why do you not want it to look like a bonfire? Because then you won't recognize that it's 8 separate lights, which is what you're supposed to do. You add additional light for each day. So, but they don't tell you how to do it. They don't tell you what it looks like. So there's a lot of leeway in all of these ritual objects, as long as you're able to fulfill the function of the ritual. So when it comes to Hanukkah lamps, people go crazy. As long as they have the 8 lights and the helper candle. So we have a peacock, we have a tree, we have what I call it's called a bench type lamp. This one's my favorite. So this 9-year-old boy designed the menorahs, because in 2013, the first night of Hanukkah was also Thanksgiving. So he designed this special, he didn't make it himself, but he designed it. It says on the bottom, you see 2013, 5,774 is the Jewish year. So it could be any shape. And Spertus Institute used to have, I don't know if they still do it, they used to have these ritual object competitions, and every year was a different object, and all these contemporary artists would do. It was spectacular. So Hanukkah lamp is a very important, is the most important symbol of Hanukkah. The other one, let's talk about what people think about, is the dreidel, these tops that we play. Now, people used to ask me, did you play dreidel growing up? And I was like, maybe for 2 minutes. I mean, it wasn't really the most interesting game. Nobody really plays dreidel, do they? I don't know. But there's this dreidel museum online. And you can go online and there are all these different dreidels. And again, these are not religious objects, they're toys. And so you can see they come in every shape and size. And the thing about the dreidel is it originally was just a game. And it's actually what I would say probably from the Middle Ages or the early modern period. And in England and Ireland, there's a game called Teetotum or Totem. And it was popular at Christmas. And in English, this game is first mentioned as Totem, 1500 to 1520. The way it's played is that depending on what letter is on the face of the top when it lands, it tells you how much you take from the kitty, how many coins or whatever you're using, candy. If you're in Israel, it says Nesgadol Haya Po. And so the final letter is not a shin, it's a pei. So depending on where you're playing it, what the last letter, which means here, instead of there. So the last letter will change. Well, what I found really interesting was that this same object, see it here, the ancestor of our dreidel is right there. This is called Children's Games, and she's over here. I had a hard time finding her, and she's got the dreidel right there. So this was so clearly this is something that comes out of Northern Europe in the 16th century, Middle Ages to early modern period. And generally on holidays, people played games. So you're supposed to be joyful, you're supposed to have a good time. So that's where the dreidel came from. And we talk about the stories we tell. So you could have just a basic thing where you were playing a dreidel, and if you get a rabbi, he'll make a story about it. So the widespread Hanukkah custom to play with a spinning top or dreidel. The famous Nachman of Braslav, the late 18th century Hasidic master, argued that the game had a deeper meaning, and the notion of a revolving wheel has a mystical connection to the temple. This is why we play with the dreidel on Hanukkah. Hanukkah is an aspect of the Holy Temple. So you see the idea of a revolving wheel. And he goes back and he uses a proof text from the Talmud to tell us that God lowered his presence into the temple, and this is the superior below. And the form of the temple was engraved on high, corresponding to the inferior above. And that's actually a Kabbalistic idea that there's the world above and a world below, or a Platonic idea, actually. They probably got it from Plato. And the temple is therefore like a dreidel, a rotating wheel where everything revolves and is transformed. So a 19th century story feeding back into a game, feeding a mystical, a religious meaning into a game. So the foods. Latkes, sufganiot, which are jelly donuts, and Hanukkah gelt. So I grew up with latkes, potato latkes, right? Did anyone grow up with jelly donuts? You had jelly donuts, okay. Because I was like, what's that? It's more popular in Israel, but jelly donuts and Hanukkah gelt. These are the foods that people talk about. And then anytime you have a picture, of course, the classic picture has all of these things. Well, there's no latkes in this picture, but there are in the other. Okay, so here's the jelly donut story. In the 1500s, 2 important jelly donut events occurred. And it's kind of sad because it has to do with slavery in the Caribbean. So once we had more sugar produced in the Caribbean, that's one side of the story. The other side of the story is this German cookbook, very popular German cookbook, was translated into Polish. And it's by 1600, paczki, like they have on Easter, okay, were thought, I guess they had it on Christmas also, Hanukkah and other special customs. So they called them ponchiks in Yiddish. They were fried in goose fat or oil, and they were popular. Then the jelly donuts traveled wherever Polish Jews went. So maybe that's anyone who had a Polish family may have been more likely to eat jelly donuts. We just didn't. And they became very popular in Israel. And the name sufganiyat comes from spongy dough mentioned in the Talmud, sufgan and svoja. Very interesting history. Here's my question. Why aren't latkes medieval? It's a trick question.
Because there were no potatoes.
Yes, because there were no potatoes. It's a trick question because you can make latkes out of something besides potatoes, but potatoes are New World food. So there were no potato latkes until potatoes came to the Old World, just like there was no spaghetti with red sauce until tomatoes went to Italy. So the story with that is that, according to Gil Marx, if you ever read his book, it's fascinating, Encyclopedia of Jewish Food, originally they made ricotta cheese pancakes. And that was a Hanukkah food in Italy. And so it spread, but in the winter in Eastern Europe, schmaltz, which is chicken fat, was easier to come by. And you can't mix meat and milk. So there's a problem right there. So they would use turnips and root vegetables, which are making a comeback in all the cooking magazines, sweet potatoes and things like that. And so that became popular. Once potatoes started spreading through Europe, people were, as they say, initially wary of them, but eventually they realized that potatoes were great and easy to grow, especially in some of these cold northern places. And so that's where potato latkes come from. So really it says 1700 to 1900. And believe it or not, Rabbi Kalonymus ben Kalonymus, guy I hang out with sometimes in my studies, in 1322, there's a poem. He actually wrote a poem where he talks about fried pancakes. Who knew? So that's the history of that. And Hanukkah gelt. Now, I was in the supermarket today. Now, when I was a kid, you get the little bags and the web bags, right? And there was like 7? Was that how many?
There are now 3.
Yes. This is my complaint. What's going on here? So there used to be like a bag of coins, and now there are 1 or 3. So it's inflation. Yeah, I know. We used to always get them. So the custom had its origin in the 17th century practice of Polish Jewry, but the kids were supposed to get the money and give it to their teachers, right? But eventually, as the world became more child-centered, I suppose, the money was given to children to keep for themselves. And so candy coins, of course, you can understand how terrific that is. American chocolatiers of the 20th century created chocolate gelt. Gelt is gold or money. In the 1920s, Lofts, an American candy company, produced the first chocolate gelt wrapped in silver or gold foil in mesh pouches resembling money bags. Barton's is another company.
Not elite.
Elite. They didn't. Elite in Israel. They don't. I have to say, Hanukkah gelt looks better than it tastes in my personal experience. So, but it is so this is a thing that you always get your kids, or if you get them a present, you put a little bag of.
Yeah.
Now you need to put 2 bags because they only give you 3.
Actually, someone at the market, at the grocery store, told me that the price of chocolate
Yes.
has gone through the roof
Yes.
because of the
Global
drought issues
That's right.
in Africa. So,
Right. Right. Well, yeah, that's what I've heard too. But I don't need to eat more chocolate, but it still seems bad. So I'm a medievalist. Hanukkah in the Middle Ages. What do we know? What are the sources? What do we have? What are the objects? And this is what I've been working on. What you're looking at is what might be the only truly medieval Hanukkah lamp extant. So this is in Paris at the Jewish Museum in Paris. Notice there are no candles for this. It's an oil lamp. Now, why no candles? What were candles made out of in the Middle Ages? Tallow, beef tallow, or pig fat or something. So first of all, they were smelly. Secondly, they weren't kosher. And beeswax candles were incredibly expensive. I mean, not so expensive in Spain, but expensive in Northern Europe. So, and oil has the benefit of also being the way that it was done in the temple. So if you could get olive oil, if you get a good clean oil, you lit an oil lamp. I know people who still have oil lamps. but it's a lot of work. So that's what we have, where we have the servitor here on the upper left, and then we have the candles on the bottom, and we have these weird sort of horseshoe-y like arches and a rose window, which looks like a little bit like a Gothic church, which gets people a little confused. And then it was meant to probably be hanging somewhere. They say, we have a source in the Middle Ages that says if your mezuzah is on the right side, your Hanukkah lamp should be on the other side. But the rabbi said, in times of danger, when it's not safe to show that you're Jewish, you can put your Hanukkah lamp inside. There's actually, they actually say that. It's written source, so you don't have to display it. So this is possibly the only one. And its source was found in Lyon, Lyon, France. I don't know if they were working on a roadway or something, and they unearthed it. Jews were expelled from Lyon, France in 1394. So it gives us, what I'm thinking, is it 1384 or 1394? Anyway, by the late 14th century. So that sort of gives us a date that if that is really a true story, that they really did find it there, and somebody didn't just drop it there, or that this could conceivably be really medieval. Okay. But here's another one, could also conceivably be really medieval, and I actually had this in my hands last week. This is Sigmund Freud's Hanukkah lamp. And he was not a practicing Jew. His wife was the daughter of a rabbi, but they were secular. But he was interested in all sorts of religious objects, and he was culturally sympathetic. So he had this in his cabinet. This one's extremely heavy. I would be inclined to say it's possibly truly medieval as well, but I'm not sure. This is the third, which one might possibly also be medieval. It's the famous Fig d'Or lamp from the Bernard Museum of Judaica in New York City at Temple Emmanuel. It's free to go in and go look at it. Weird images, again, with an animal like a griffin or a dragon on it. Oil lamp as well. So those three could conceivably be medieval. But how do we know? Hard to say. What did people light? Well, they may have just lit something like this called a cresset stone. So they're just holes on a stone. And the Romans used to do this for light. So this one could this, there's 3, 3, and 3. Could it have been a Hanukkah lamp? Hard to say. Hard to say. This is in one of the museums in Spain. I think it's in Barcelona's Jewish Museum. And you see, my point here is to show you that there's sort of a reproduction in the front there of another lamp that was sort of found under mysterious circumstances in Spain. Is it real? I don't know. And the other ones there in the front are Moroccan 19th or 20th century objects. So this gets me back to what I was talking about before, is that a lot of things that are exhibited are not medieval things. And that brings us to the famous fragments that we're finding. These are the most controversial things that are being studied in Spain. They're unearthing these little pinch pots, oil pot lamps. Remember, when people had houses with terracotta lamps, they would walk around with these little lamps. Now, you don't have to have a menorah, a Hanukkah lamp, to do Hanukkah. You could just take, and the rabbis say this, clean off your oil lamps and line them, add a different one, add an additional one every day. So you could have had 8 of these and then had the helper. And I think that that's how most people did their Hanukkah lamps in medieval Spain. But they unearthed a few, see on the upper left, they unearthed some of these in a place called Teruel. And some of them, were attached, some weren't attached. So there are all these fragments. And they created a reproduction based on this image in a manuscript, which is actually an Italian manuscript. And it's probably aspirational, right? They would never have had anything this enormous or this gold or anything. And so the people in these museums created a reproduction of these fragments to look like this. And the only real parts of it are those two. So they create a reproduction based on the idea that there were these lamps that were attached like this. They add the paint and they say, this is a Hanukkah lamp. And they say that, but probably unearthed in what was the Jewish quarter of Teruel in the whenever Teruel had a Jewish community. But once this was reproduced this way, and then they completely create this larger one. This is just an imagination. This is their imagination. Oh, well, that's the servitor lamp for the oil. And once this happens, every time a little piece is found, it's called a Hanukkah lamp. Right? And then it's gotten to the point now where archaeologists in Spain are saying, finding these two together like that indicate a Jewish home. It's not just that we're going to what was a Jewish community and doing excavations and finding things. It is the premier indicator of a Jewish household, which I think is completely irresponsible and wrong. So if you go to the Museo Sfarad or some of these places, they'll have a reproduction of this spurious creation and tell you that this is what the Jewish Hanukkah lamps looked like in medieval Spain, which I think is a problem. There's some more. So see the same thing? Those two on the top, those colored ones that aren't green, that's all they have from that one. And they're calling it a Hanukkah from the excavation, archaeological of the Juderia of the Castillo de Lorca in Murcia. So hard to say, but this is what's happening. And now we also have, these are the things I was working on recently, a bunch, that's sophisticated, a number, 5 or 6 that look like this, that remind you of the one in Paris with the servitor on the side instead of the top. When these entered the museums, and this is from the Victoria and Albert, this was from the Hilbert collection, bequest of 1955, 1956, they thought it was medieval. They called it Italian medieval. They didn't know what they were talking about. They just said, oh, it's medieval. Now everyone believes that it's 19th century. And this one too, 19th century. You see it says M431, 1956. These are all from the Hilbert bequest. So my interest is, why were people in the 19th century making these? How did they sell them? Who did they make them for? Did they sell them as medieval things and try to fool people? Or was it just appealing to people's interest in historicity, so that making it look more authentic, and so they were marketing it that way? So we're slowly learning as we're testing, doing metals testing, that we might eventually be able to tell by doing metals testing what alloys were medieval alloys and what alloys are 19th century alloys.
So I have a question. This is reflecting my interest in Holocaust studies.
Yeah.
Is it possible that it's post-Holocaust and they were trying to sell a lot of these objects to people whose ritual objects were destroyed?
That's an interesting question. I would have to go and look at all the other ones. I have a catalog that I made myself.
Right.
I think some of them came before. I think Hilbert bought this long before the Holocaust, probably. So,
Right.
but that's a very interesting thing. But I do think the medieval look makes it seem more authentic. Because if you look, I've done some research on like early 20th century to see what was being produced in silversmiths, Jewish silversmiths in England, or silversmiths making things for Jews in England who weren't necessarily Jewish. It's a totally different style. So someone's deliberately looking for this medieval style, or someone's deliberately marketing it, because there is a trade in Judaica. So once you get people interested in stuff, you've got people faking things. So that's the question. And they just tested the ones for me, that was very nice. They tested the ones in the Victoria and Albert. They're going to test the one in Paris. That's going to be more decisive. If they find alloys, certain impurities that are distinctly medieval, then we'll know. It's like dendrochronology. You have to set up a database, and we'll know more. And then it would be nice to know about Freud's, and it would be nice to know about the one in New York. But there are loads of these. So there are 5 or 6 that look like the one in Paris. And you can see that the character of the alloy is different. So it's fascinating. It's very fascinating. Who sold them? Who bought them? I don't know. But But this fellow, Hildborough, he bought everything. And so but he doesn't leave any notes. I looked in the archive, he leaves no notes saying who he bought them from and where, which is
So no
sad.
provenance.
No provenance other than it came from the Hildborough bequest. He collected the most bizarre, he collected all sorts of things. I mean, we can talk about it later. He talked about it. So here's the surprising addition, and I should probably end with that. So work is permitted on Hanukkah, but women refrain from work during the entire time the lights are burning. Okay, so you get a break, and they should not be deterred from this obligation. And so this is a reference to Judith. So it says, the miracle is effected by a very beautiful woman, the daughter of Yochanan the high priest. When the monarch demanded that she lie with him, she replied that she would acquiesce. Then she fed him cheese, salty cheese, which gets us back to the ricotta cheese pancakes, until he became very thirsty, drank wine, he became drunk, and he fell asleep. And you know what she did? She cut his head off and brought it to Jerusalem. When the enemy general saw that their king was dead, he and the enemy fled. Therefore, it's customary to eat dairy dishes on Hanukkah in remembrance of the miracle achieved by milk. Well, I think the woman achieved the miracle, not the milk. But so we have lots of these. This is Judith. This is Caravaggio's, but even better is Artemisia Gentileschi's. And I mean, the sad story about this is that apparently she was raped by her painting teacher. And some people see this as a revenge painting. But anyway, it was a popular subject. And there is a link then between the Judith story, even though the timing's not right at all, the chronology is wrong, the Judith story and Hanukkah. And so we have a lot of Hanukkah lamps, especially in Italy in the 17th and 18th century, with Judith on the Hanukkah lamp with a knife. I never knew this until I prepared this lecture. So you learn something new every day. I'm not sure I want this Hanukkah lamp, but it's an interesting association. No. And some American developments I've just mentioned that, we talked in the Christmas lecture about how the domestication of holidays, and in the middle of around the Civil War time or so, Christmas genre paintings, family at home on Christmas. We have some of the same thing. Moritz Oppenheim in 1880, so showing the Jews as a family. The kids are playing different games, and they're lighting the Hanukkah. So this idea of Hanukkah as not necessarily the equivalent of Christmas, but as something that would allow Jews to have an identity. And remember, it's a relatively minor holiday. It's a festival, but its prominence in the United States, I think, comes because it comes around the same time as Christmas. And there's this feeling that even from the beginning, when the first Reform rabbis from Germany were here, that Jews should have something of their own and shouldn't be tempted to celebrate even what was seen as a secular holiday by the Germans, Christmas. Do I have anything else? I don't even remember. Let's see. Oh. Oh yeah. So maybe we'll end with this one. So you probably are familiar with the Chabad menorah. So if you ever see these guys driving around from the Chabad movement, Lubavitch Chabad, they always have a menorah that is straight, like it's diagonal lines instead of the arch of. This is the sacked temple menorah shown on the Arch of Titus. Why do they have this distinctive shape? And basically it's because one of the great Rebbes said, well, that's the way it was, and they all accepted it. But why he said it was because of this manuscript. I actually saw this manuscript in person in Oxford, and it's Maimonides' commentary on the Mishnah. And he has a drawing, and he says, well, the menorah kind of looked like this. This is kind of an idea. And so because of this drawing, which is supposed to be manuscript done by Maimonides' hand, and they revered Maimonides, they decided that they would adopt that for their own. And we talk about, this is interesting for me as a Pittsburgher, although I wasn't living in Pittsburgh at the time. The use of the ritual object versus the symbol. The ritual object, the Hanukkah lamp, is a ritual object. You use it to celebrate or to commemorate this miracle. You use it as part of your practice as a Jew for Hanukkah. But there was a case of the Supreme Court in Allegheny County versus the Pittsburgh ACLU to decide whether this violated, having a Hanukkah lamp, a display, violated the First Amendment's clause establishing that the government may not endorse or prohibit the free exercise of any religion. So there was a display of a creche, a Christian nativity scene, and a Hanukkah, a Hanukkah menorah on public property. The court ruled against the creche, but they allowed the display of a Hanukkah lamp along with a Christmas tree. Now, Christmas trees are symbolic. It's not a religious thing, but a Hanukkah lamp is a ritual object, but it has become a symbolic object. So it shows you how things change through time. It's very, very interesting, and I wasn't really aware of this case at all. And it was in my own hometown. So that's why, as you drive around on the North Shore, you will see Hanukkah. I saw in Winnetka the other day, and I maybe even in Kenilworth, the Hanukkah lamp on the corner, Christmas tree. They're using the Chabad lamp, probably because Chabad put them up. But they are now, according to this case, at least, if it's still, I guess it's still viable, that it's considered a symbolic thing on equivalence with a Christmas tree rather than a ritual object. So it's kind of an interesting development. Anyway, why don't we I'll take some questions because it's getting kind of late. Anybody has any questions? And if not, not. Yes.
Any document stating that the shaman's candle has to be at the same level or higher than all.
Yeah, there is something about it being, you're right, and I've forgotten where it comes, if it's in the Shulchan Aruch.
It is.
It is? Okay, yeah, it's supposed to be higher.
So,
It's so you don't confuse it, right?
no,
But giving it
to make it kosher, right? To make it has to do with fulfilling the legal requirement of the mitzvah, lighting the commandment to light the candle in a certain way. There's also a whole big argument about which direction. Right,
Yeah.
to light
Well, there was the two, I think Hillel and Shammai argued about whether you add a lamp every day or whether you start with 8 and you take one away every day. And they ended up holding with you add one every day. Yeah. So the answer is yes. There is. I mean, I thought Shulchan Aruch, was I right? Okay. So the legal code, which originally came from Joseph Cairo, it was Sephardic, but he did it in the Ottoman Empire in the 15th century post-expulsion. 15th century? Early 16th century. But it was relating, it was codifying all of this halacha from earlier. Yeah. So the question is then, are these correct? The lamps that have the one on the side. I guess it's not though.
would be a kosher.
Wow.
In the middle down below.
Yeah.
But then it's not kosher.
Yeah, but I think there are a lot of things. And I told you the story about you have to have them in a straight line. The rabbi says they must be in a straight line. Otherwise, if it's a circle, it's a bonfire. But we found now medieval Hanukkah lamps and accounts of them in North Africa, Sephardic communities and Mizrahi communities that have circular Hanukkah lamps. So I guess they don't know. Not everybody follows all the rules.
Right.
Yeah. Well, they would probably say that it did, but I don't know. Yes, question.
In this area, I interviewed my late mother, and she kept saying that she lit candles at the time of Hanukkah, and I said, well, what did you, were you always Christian, Catholic? She said, yes. But she said in this region that the candelabra makers had candles for the Catholic Christians to the Beatitudes. And as they lit, and she said it became strength in numbers to protect the Jewish residents.
Interesting.
So everybody had, nobody's going to really count. So, you're a marauder, but there were so many problems in this area that they said we want strength. And I think it happened in Montana.
I was just going to say that. I was going to have a slide about Montana. That was a living witness to this idea that you don't have to display it in times of danger. And this kid
They
did it and he was shot. He wasn't shot, but they shot through his window. And a number of people in the community lit Hanukkah lamps in solidarity, which is nice.
Yeah, so she was speaking about it, yeah, and how the candelabra, you just went to them and said, I want to the attitudes, and you had it made.
That's interesting. I never thought about it. Huh.
This region, this is what's, I didn't know about this court case.
So it's in Western Pennsylvania.
And that, well, it's Pittsburgh area, the area of the synagogue of the tree.
Tree of Life?
Tree of
Yeah.
Life, and that whole,
That's my neighborhood.
then it was the mills,
Oh, down by the mills.
down by the mills. and this-
That's
It
fascinating.
was interesting how she said, we lit the candles at Hanukkah, and I'm like, oh, let me get the paper out. And I started a little interview.
Now, how many Beatitudes are there? I've forgotten.
There's 8.
Is it 8? Oh, that makes sense then. That's perfect.
And she said that it was, every priest, I don't use the word priest at the time,
Yeah.
wanted it as well. And it was interesting, the solidarity line, but I believe when she kept saying strength in numbers, she was speaking of.
Wow.
Protect your neighbor.
I've never heard of that. Thank you. That's fascinating. Fascinating.
Very honored to hear the story, and it was just asking her how she grew up and what
Yeah.
the holidays were like.
Yeah. Yeah. Huh. Anything else? If not, thank you very much for coming.
Good.